Hello and welcome back to the history of video games. My name is Ben, and join with me this week and every week, my good friend Wes. How you doing, Wes?
I am doing pretty good. How you doing, Ben?
I'm doing good. You know, we're filming on a Friday, which never happens for us.
No.
We have the whole weekend ahead of us, and I'm really excited about that.
Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like I enjoy doing the podcast, but then there's a certain sense of like, oh, I'm done. It's time for the weekend. So
yeah, exactly.
Good things to come during this recording, but also good things to come after.
Yes. So why don't we start off by talking about what you've been playing, Wes? I'm very interested to know if you've been playing Doom, if you've been playing something else. What are we doing?
Yeah, well, so I have been playing Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord, but I'm saving that one because I was doing the Animal Crossing and Doom and playing a lot of both of those, and I didn't really get a chance to talk about Doom, so that's what I'm going to talk about today. I've been doing it kind of a slow pace through it. I was expecting that I might just like burn through the game because it's a super addicting style of gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of fun to just like take each level at a time. And also it gets your adrenaline pumping so much. Like sometimes you need to take a break after a level. You bash your head against a wall like a bunch of times fighting this boss and you're just like, okay, I did it. Take a breather, go play Animal Crossing, plant some flowers instead of killing demons and all that.
Right.
But yeah, so it's Doom Eternal. It's pretty much the same as Doom 2016 as far as like the visuals and the mechanics, and of course like glory killing, which is just like the brutal things you do to the demons when they're weak, is a huge part of it. But this does a lot of cool stuff with adding like extra movement. Before you kind of just had a double jump and you ran fast, but now you have recharging dashes that you can use, a double jump, and then you can kind of like fly towards enemies when you glory kill them and upgrade a whole bunch of different movement stuff that gives it a unique feel. And it's this whole strange sort of thing where like you go through the level and then you get to this area and you're like, okay, this is definitely like an arena made for fighting demons that is specifically made. And it's it doesn't matter so much in that game that you can easily tell that it's like a fight arena because that's like what it's all about. So you see it and you get super excited. But my whole time playing through it so far, the music lives up to the amazing music that the first game had. Which, you know, it's just that like intense, almost like techno metal kind of like super heavy metal. You probably know what the subgenre might be called for that, but I'm not sure.
I'm like not good with subgenres, but I know it's on an 8-string, which is pretty low. That's pretty low.
Yeah.
So that's like an octave below normal standard tuning.
Right.
So
and really helps give
metal.
You that demonic feel and all that bass. But that's great. The gameplay's great. They threw some story elements in there, which like anytime they start adding story to Doom, you're like, whoa, I don't know. But it's not too heavy-handed and it's actually pretty good, and it's still basically just like backstory of why Doom Guy, the main character, just like wants to destroy all these demons, and so it works out.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't looked up how many chapters are in it. I'm thinking I'm about like halfway through.
Okay.
I had like 3 times so far where I fought a boss and I'm like, man, that was a hard boss, and then like 2 levels later it becomes a standard enemy.
Oh god.
But I just fought what was like the first boss, I feel like it had 2 dedicated health bars and 2 phases, and I would be surprised to see this guy show up in another level, but who knows, he could.
Yeah.
And that was a super fun boss fight.
Nice.
One of the weird negatives though that I do have with the game is that they give you extra lives because they kind of part of their whole thing is also combining like the old school game feel with like this crazy new style that they've come up with. Mm-hmm. So the extra lives kind of play into that pretty well. But I'm so like completionist about the collectibles that I go into every major boss fight with like 4 extra lives. And I usually end up beating it one try, but I'm like, I don't know if I did it right. Just kind of brute force my way through it and use like 4 lives. But it gives me a little bit of replayability because then I can go in there with 1 life, replay that map, and then test my metal, I guess, if I want to be super hardcore about it and see if I can beat the boss.
Yeah. Sounds awesome. I never played the most recent Doom games, but when the first, what was it, Doom 2015?
2016 is the like the new one, yeah.
When that one came out, I had watched a lot of videos on it, and I was like, this really seems like almost the pinnacle of like an FPS to me. You feel like so much more powerful than anybody else, and you were just mowing people down. Like to me, that's like the best.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know if you have how the gun feel is compared to other stuff you've played for this new Doom.
Well, so it's very similar to like Quake and old school arena shooters, like Unreal Tournament, that kind of game.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got a whole different feel to it because it's not really like, I don't know, it's super hard to compare it to other like FPS campaign shooters. For
Right.
one, because a lot of them are like Modern War or World War II kind of based things, but the gunplay is just totally different. I mean, there's no recoil, obviously. You can shoot a rocket at your foot and it almost kills you, but like you don't die. And
Right.
yeah, it's super different. And in a lot of games, it might not be what I want. Like in Call of Duty Warzone, like I don't get into it so much, but a lot of people say, okay, it's cool when guns have recoil because then if you're good at your recoil control, you show a lot of skill when you're able to spray people down with an assault rifle, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But this is just like the way they have the gunplay worked out just totally flows with how the Doom playstyle that they've made is. So it's very different from other stuff I've played, but in an awesome way, I think.
Okay. So it's more arcadey, not as realistic, it sounds.
yes, yeah.
Okay. That's interesting.
And I usually play on the higher difficulties, so like you can get destroyed pretty fast if you're not moving constantly. So it's also one where you're sort of just like high sensitivity on your mouse, like whipping back and forth, aiming all over sides of the screen, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. That's cool. It reminds me of kind of getting into what I've been doing, Wes, a little bit.
Okay, yeah, good transition.
I don't want to talk about this too much right now because I want to wait till I have more stuff done. But I've been working on my Unity game, making it in my spare time again. Which, if you guys remember, it's kind of like this FPS StarCraft 2 hybrid I'm trying to do by hand, and I have no experience in coding or art or anything. But so far, I've been making steady progress, so it's been cool. But I use actually Warframe a lot as my, like, when I think about good gun gameplay, that's the game I'm like, well, that game just feels really good. I know it's
Yeah.
in third person, but I don't know. So that's the one that I go to right now when I think of pinnacle for gun gameplay. For me, it's more like a Warframe type game. So if anything I can do to make my game feel more like that, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna do it like that.
Interesting, yeah. Yeah, that's interesting because I always think of the movement as like what one of the things that Warframe does best, but really it's a bunch of
Right.
stuff sort of tied together that
Mhm.
make it such a crazy good game. And I never thought about it from that aspect, but the gunplay is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's just like one of those things where it's really easy to get headshots in Warframe, I think. And why is that? Is it because the guys' heads are bigger? It's not. Like it has a lot of there's a lot of moving components to making the guns feel really good. And it feels really fast at the same time, but you feel like you're really accurate, Like my favorite weapon's like the bow and arrow in the game probably.
Right.
And there's no like stamina meters, for instance. So in my game, there's not going to be stamina. I'm just trying to take a lot of stuff from it, but to me, it feels the most fluid of any gun game I've played, I think.
Yeah. And they kind of go on the less quote unquote realistic side of it as well.
Yeah.
Because I forget the exact phrase for it, but there's it's like bullet variation or bullet deviation, which some games do, which
Mhm.
adds a random deviation to any bullet fired so that it doesn't always go where the crosshair is aiming. And
Right.
I think Warframe either has none of that or it doesn't have any of that for its like accurate guns.
Right.
So I think that plays
Yeah.
into it being like, okay, I'm zipping all over the place, but if I point my crosshair there, I'm going to hit there.
Yeah, I like that. And I feel like, the time it takes for like a bullet to hit something's very fast, right? I mean, but it just feels like if I do a quick motion and go towards somebody's head, like it's gonna hit him in the head and stuff like
Right.
that. Like it just always seems to go where I want it to go without me really trying that hard. So it's hard to do that. And so I heard Doom was kind of similar. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
kind of was just getting your opinion on that. But let me move to the something else I do want to talk about for what I've been playing, Wes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
I went back and started playing my Pokemon ROM hack again. That's what
Oh,
I've been doing a lot.
it lives.
I know. It's I'm doing my Nuzlocke run, which for people out there that don't know, basically I'm only allowed to catch one Pokemon per route, and if any Pokemon dies, I'm not allowed to use them for the rest of the run. And last time I I stopped playing, I had just beaten Misty and lost 4 of my 6 Pokemon. But since then I've been playing a lot recently, and I haven't lost a single other Pokemon. I feel like my team is really good now, even though like you can't really anticipate what Pokemon you're going to get along the way. But I got Drowsy, like that's a solid tier 1 Pokemon in my opinion. I got Machop, he's very good. I got a Gloom now. I still have Charmeleon, so like I've got a pretty decent team, and it's been going really well. And I've been making notes and changes in my ROM hack along the way. Mainly like the thing I've been doing a lot recently is I'll verse people and it'll be like they'll throw out Rattata. I'm like, I've already beaten like 20 Rattatas.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm like, okay, he's gonna have a Vulpix now, or something, just to give it some variety. But I've been thinking about it a lot because I have the opportunity to change anything I want in the ROM hack. And this is where I kind of want to get your opinion, Wes. To me, like, the ideal Pokemon game is kind of like every route that you go to, there's new Pokemon there, and that those Pokemon are legitimately interesting to your party. Like, you could throw them in, like, you might want to throw them in. And right now, it feels like there's a lot of really good Pokemon you get really early on. They take a slot in your 6, and then you're not picking up anybody else. By the time you get 10 hours in the game, that's your party. I feel like Hypno is one of those that you get pretty early in the game, and he's going to be with me to the end. The psychic Pokemon are just so good. So I was like, maybe I should move him later. Move other bad Pokemon up closer to the beginning. But here's what I wanted to know from you. I was thinking about it, and obviously your starter is one that you have in your party and it doesn't change. You're taking your starter to the final 4, to the end. So what if you can already catch the starters in my ROM hack other places in the game. So what if I just made the starters like worse Pokemon so that you were encouraged to change them out eventually? Would that be like to the point where like this isn't the original anymore? And it's like, that's not what I'm looking for, or maybe it's interesting. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well,
is it because I was thinking, here's what I was thinking, change the starting 3 with something along the lines of like Horsey or Goldeen or something like that. Maybe a Vulpix or Growlithe, and then the grass is kind of hard, but maybe like Execute. In Gen 1, he doesn't have any actual psychic moves, so I think it might be okay. But if I did something like that instead.
I could see that. Yeah, the starters are definitely really good. I think it's, especially when you're messing around with the 150, and if you want to make it different so that you have a different starter experience, I say go for it. It changes it up, but I'm fine.
What's your if you were looking to play a casual playthrough of the game, like that's kind of what I'm going for, but I want it to be the best casual playthrough. So is that like taking it to what they call chocolate, too far away from the original that this isn't?
Right.
Like you would rather just play the original at that point.
I see what you're saying. I think if possible, you need to make it an option to have starters, because so many people are like, I like this gen because of the starters.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's tough. I think they're so identifiable to the generation that for a lot of people, it's like they're part of what makes it really good.
Yeah. I've just been thinking about it a lot because I have the ability to change things, and I can do basically anything I want. So I was like, is this a good idea? Is it not? Yeah. I have to keep thinking about that.
It might also be cool though, because then they would be rare, and you'd be like, oh, there's a Charmeleon or whatever, or Charizard, depending on what stage in the game you find them, and it would be super hype when you finally got to them.
Yeah. So
I don't know. There's pros and cons.
Yeah, I feel like with them, they'd be good basically anytime you found them in the game. You'd be like, okay, I'm still gonna throw them in.
Right.
This is Squirtle. I mean, how can you not, or something? I don't know, but yeah, something I'm thinking about, along with a bunch of other stuff. I want to move like water Pokemon earlier in the game, because especially with like a Nuzlocke run, it's like I'm basically guaranteed to have a Gyarados in my party. Maybe having some more variety there might be good. I already added like a Krabby, like in the grass somewhere by water. I'm like,
oh yeah.
I was like, yeah, I can probably get away with that.
Kingler's good.
Yeah, Kingler's good. He's got a Crab Hammer.
Oh, I didn't realize he had Crap Hammer in Gen 1.
Mm-hmm. So, I'm having a good time playing through it, making changes, and I think next, I feel like I'm getting ready to go to Gen 2 now. I'm like, played through the same map too many times now.
Right, right.
But yeah, that's what I've been doing. Let's get into the special topic. I feel like we've been talking a little bit. I do want to say, by the way, real quickly, when we get in the timeline, I'm only going to review one game today. There just wasn't many good games, and we didn't feel the need to cover four. So we're covering three today. But let's get into the special topic, which does directly correlate to the timeline. And that's because we'll be talking about a new console today, a second generation console, the RCA Studio II, which is super exciting, but also super not exciting.
Yeah.
For reasons that we'll get into. But I thought for our special topic today, we'd cover the background of the RCA Studio II and its development. So, really, the whole console is the brainchild of a guy named Joseph Weisbecker. He worked for the RCA company, which stands for Radio Corporation of America, way back in like the 50s or 60s, I want to say. And the RCA is a studio it's a company that's been around since 1919. Super old. They
Wow.
have been in everything: radio, movies, silent movies, computers, electronics, just about everything and anything. And at the time, they were making some mainframe computers, but one of the engineers, this Joseph Weisbecker, was like, I kind of want to get into personal computers. That's what he was interested in. And so he just started building one in his spare time at home, which he nicknamed Fred. Which stands for something. What does it stand for? I missed it.
Something educational, something, right?
Yeah, something educational, something. But yeah, it's a personal computer, and he basically brought it to RCA. They kind of were like, I don't know, maybe, I don't know. But eventually, they're like, okay, why don't you start maybe looking at this new product line for us? So he came out with his first computer, which I think that came out in 76 or 77. The timeline is kind of like all over the place at this company because the head of the company had just either died off or retired or something like that. There was a new head. They didn't really know what they were doing. Like the RCA, the Studio 2 here, and the computers and stuff, like they were ready like in 75, 76, and like didn't get approved for like a year, and then had even further delays of like patents and stuff. So things are kind of weird. Like we know certain games for the RCA Studio 2 were completed as far back as like early 76.
Yeah.
But the whole console got delayed so many times, and all these like weird computer things were delayed or just prototypes or came out, in a couple stores, and there were so many different weird things that were happening. But essentially, Joseph Weisbecker, he comes out with the Cosmic Elf, I should say. The RCA 1802 was actually the microprocessor in the Elf, which was the computer. But basically, they had that, and they were like, well, let's make it smaller. They were thinking about arcades at one point. They made an arcade machine in 75, but it basically had like a little test run, and they pulled the plug on that project. And eventually, Weisbecker was like, okay, I kind of want to do a home console, and it got approved, and through a lot of delays, it was finally released in January. I've seen some dates in February of 77, so that's where we're at now. Hopefully I said everything, but Wes, why don't you talk us a little bit about maybe the console itself, and then about Joyce, who's a very interesting character in this story.
Yeah, absolutely. So the console itself, while we're considering it Generation 2 as well, it was a console that ran on cartridges, although it did also have 5 built-in games, I think, that it ran on the console itself. It was sort of a strange console in general. Like, I mean, it plugged into your TV, which was normal and all that, but it was controlled by basically 2 number pads, like the numpad on your computer, that sort of had like arrow keys on some of the numbers. I think it's partly because it came with a math game, so maybe that was a big seller or something, or a big driver for this number pad. But it's also similar to, I forget which of the Odysseys it was, maybe both the 200 and 300, where the controls are just part of the console. So you're sitting like right next to each other as you're playing with these little number pads to play all these games.
Yeah, it seems weird. Like it feels like one person would have to use their left hand almost.
Right, yeah, or face backwards and not even see the TV.
Right. So definitely weird that it's two non-detachable numpads for your controllers.
Just a very strange choice, and especially when it's coming out in early 77, you're kind of like, oh, this seems a little questionable about
Yeah.
how well it's going to do. But getting into Joyce Weisbecker, who is Joseph Weisbecker's daughter, while Joseph was building this computer in his basement, he was talking to his two daughters about it as well and like trying to get them excited about it. And Joyce was really, really into the idea of puzzle solving and making games that you could basically were solving complex puzzles. So she's credited as being one of the first woman to create a commercial video game. She wasn't directly employed by RCA at first, but she started making games when she was in college, and then RCA would pay for them. And then she ended up going on to create games that would be put on a cartridge for the RCA, Speedway and Tag, which I believe come out either later this year or next year.
Yep. We're going to be covering them later this year, as well as her other game called Schoolhouse 1. She also did. So both of those we'll cover later this year, but that's super cool.
Yeah. And even before that, she was writing code for computer games and putting that out there so that people could code different computer games. I forget exactly what, but it was some interesting variations that she made. So really cool that the daughter of the person who created this console basically became the first woman to make a video game. So I thought that was very important to note. It's awesome. And that's pretty much all I had for that.
Yeah, I just want to briefly say another thing that made this console second gen, which by the way, this is the second generation console after the Fairchild, so it's kind of big in that respect as well. But one of the things that also made it that, as along with the cartridges, was the fact that it had a microprocessor in it. So it ran on the RCA 1802, which is the same microprocessor that the computer ran on. So that's really cool. Although this console would not do that well. We'll talk about why in the timeline. So Wes, why don't we head over there?
Yeah, let's get straight into it. Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back. And let's get straight into our timeline for today's episode. We're going to start things off real fast and furious with some exciting computer games. First, we have the Creative Computing January-February issue. The first game that we wanted to talk about from there is a game called Drag, where basically you input tire size, horsepower, and gear ratio and try to build a dragster that's hopefully better than the computers. Basically one of those like sort of random-ish enter numbers until you figure out what the good ratios are, but at least it's a slightly different theme.
Yeah, it's got a good theme to it. And maybe if you're building cars, that's good information to have. I don't know. But moving on from that, we have another game here called Master Bagels. Yeah, it's basically bagels, which is a mastermind type game that we've covered before. It just has some more options as far as different things that the computer do to make the game a little bit more interesting, but it's still not interesting.
Yeah. And next up, we have Daytona 500, which was sort of similar to the Civil War game that we talked about. It was a text-based simulation. Every 50 laps around the Daytona racetrack, you would have options of changing tires and racing riskier, among other things, to kind of change, like, well, if you get this risky 20% chance to do this, then you could be faster. Sort of text-based, percentage-based game that we've seen before.
Right. I would have played that if I had like good code for it, but I can't code like 500 lines by hand.
Yeah, it's a bit much.
beyond my capabilities. Maybe in C#, which is what my Unity game is in, but this is in basic. So, all right, moving on from that, in the same issue, we have a fourth game, which is kind of rare for creative computing to have so many games in one issue. And this one's called Strike 9. It's a game where you use numbers 1 to 10, and the computer rolls 2 dice and adds the numbers together, and then you have to match that number by using numbers from your pool. So, for example, if they get a 7, you can do like 3 plus 4, and then that's good for that round, but then the next round you can't use 3 and 4 again. So you're kind of hoping that you can use all your numbers, and if you do that at the end, you win. I don't know how fun that is, but it is what it is.
And then next up, we have the People's Computer Company January-February issue, but this one was pretty much just reprints of games that we've already seen, stuff like Reverse and many variations on Mastermind-type games. And then next up, we're getting into the main event of, or at least one of the main events of today's episode, the RCA Studio II console. And Ben will start us off with the first of the launch titles for that.
Yes, so today we're going to look at just the launch titles. There are quite a few titles that came out in 77, but none of them had dates. So there's 5 launch titles, and I thought, let's cover those 5 today. We'll cover the other ones throughout the year. So I kind of broke them up in a couple, like maybe 3 or 4 groups, just to break it up a bit. But we're going to be covering the 5 launch titles. The first one here is maybe the reason why there's a numpad on the console. I don't know. But it's called Addition, and all it is there's basically 3 numbers that pop up on the screen. So it might be like 1, 1, and 3. And the first person who adds them and then types that number on the numpad gets points. So it's like a weird multiplayer racing addition game. And I actually like the fact that it's kind of a race. The first person that adds it up gets the points. That's the only like benefit to make math interesting.
Right. Yeah.
But it's still like a math game. It's not really a game. There's no real graphics. Though the reason that this console is not the best console is because it's in black and white. That becomes like apparent right away. Even in this edition game, it's black and white. I mean, the Fairchild had something similar. I mean, it wasn't a game. It was more just like add this up, but that was in color at least. And this one, black and white, and we'll be talking about that more. But yeah, that's the first game, called Addition.
We should say that Joseph Weisbecker did have sort of a inclination, or at least he was excited about making educational type games. So it doesn't come off as being the most interesting, but probably why that was included on this thing, getting that sort of educational game vibe in there. The next one we've seen on some other consoles and computers, so it might have been a popular thing at the time, but this is called Doodle, and it basically just allows you to draw and erase on the screen with 8 directional movement. But again, this is in black and white, so it's kind of weird to have a Doodle game on a black and white system.
Yeah, definitely. The next one, though, is actually probably one of the most interesting games of the whole console. Maybe one of the most interesting console games we've ever done, called Patterns. I don't know if you had a chance to look at this one, Wes, but it's really interesting. Essentially, you start with a doodle, and the doodle can be as short or as long as you like, and then you hit a button on the console, and the console will then replicate that doodle, but it'll be slightly varied. Like, it'll be slightly, probably diagonally up or something like that. And it just keeps going over and over and over again forever. And it creates these really interesting patterns on the screen. It kind of looks like an old school screensaver or something like that. It's obviously not a game, but considering it's just black and white, it's really surprising how good the patterns look of such, a random start that you could have with it. It actually genuinely looks really nice, I think.
Oh, that does sound pretty neat.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And because you have some freedom of how the first pattern is made, that can, drastically change how all the other patterns from that look. Essentially, because if a pattern gets moved slightly over and like up a little bit, if it goes over places that have already been filled in with a line, it'll then delete that line. So because of that, instead of just like filling up the screen with all white eventually, it actually continuously makes new patterns all the time because it's kind of taking away as much white as it's adding. So it's really, really interesting, and the patterns are genuinely like interesting and different. As you know, every time it starts going through the screen again, it actually makes something brand new again, which is really cool. So weirdly enough, one of the more interesting games, I think, or programs. But that's going to move me to the first like real game. We had addition and 2 drawing games so far, essentially. This is the first real game that came with as a launch title with the RCA Studio II, and I'm going to be covering this one. This is the one game I rated today. It's called Bowling, and first of all, can I just say this console was released with no Pong games on it? How weird is that?
Yeah. It's a bold move, and we appreciate it.
Yeah, we do. But yeah, it came out with bowling. They're like, you know what's really popular? I don't know. It seems like a weird one to have, but I'm grateful that it's there. I do think it's kind of an interesting one. Essentially, their implementation of bowling is you have a big square, not a ball, but a square on the left-hand side.
Right.
It's moving up and down by itself. You've got the pins on the right-hand side, which are larger than they should be, and they're kind of like these smaller squares, I guess you can say. And you have to hit the button, your like launch button, at the right time so that the ball's like kind of right where you want it to be, either on the edge or in the middle or whatever. You hit the button and the ball starts going horizontal at that point, and then will hit into the other pins, erasing them. Now, the interesting thing about bowling, and why it's more interesting, or maybe slightly more interesting, is you actually have 3 different types of shots that you can do. You've got a straight shot, and it'll always knock down anything, straight in front of it. But it won't like the pins won't like hit each other and stuff and fall down.
Right.
If you do a straight shot, but they will do that if you do the curve shots. And the curve shots are actually kind of hard to use because the ball will always start to turn by itself even before reaching the pins. So it's surprisingly difficult to find that sweet spot you need for spares or strikes. But if you do it correctly, you can actually get spares and strikes, which means that pins will hit each other without the ball kind of being there, which is really interesting and cool. So you do get some variety of gameplay there. And, picking which of the different shots you have, basically you have one that curves upward or to the left and one that curves downward or to the right, and then your straight shot. So those are your options there. But it was fun. It was actually surprisingly fun. I think I genuinely wanted to get a strike. I was like, I'm not leaving until I get a strike.
Oh man, yeah.
Which is a pretty good sign, I'd say. But the game overall, well, let's get into it maybe. So let's start out with gameplay. Like I mentioned, it's really good. I gave it a 3 out of 10. I think it's solid. It's probably more fun with another person, but honestly, playing by myself, it was still fun for me. And I don't know, there was something just like addicting about wanting to get a good score and learning, where that sweet spot is for the different types of shots. I really wanted to get a strike. I never got a strike, but I did get a spare a couple times.
That's something, yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know, it was just kind of addicting in a weird way. I can't describe it, but maybe I was just feeling a bowling game. I don't know. But that's basically where the positives end though. Because for graphics, I gave it a 1 out of 10. I mean, this is in black and white. You do have a place that shows score, but the score comes up in between people's turns and does not stay on the screen for very long, maybe a second. So it's honestly, I forget what score we're at constantly. And if it was just there the whole time, it would be way better. The game also doesn't take up the full screen space, so you feel like you're playing in a narrow lane kind of in the middle of the screen, and you're like, why is this not as big and not, it looks kind of weird. All the pins and the ball are squares. The ball is actually kind of more like a rectangle, which is kind of really weird for bowling, but I guess it works. And the thing that hurts it the most, and something that I think you'll be backing me up later on this, is the game. It's not consistent movement. It's really more you've got a frame of what it looks like, and then a couple of frames later it changes, and a couple of frames later it changes. So it's more like a screen is constantly refreshing in the background, slowly, it doesn't feel like good movement.
Right.
Things just aren't very fluid, and that hurts it quite a bit because you'll be like bowling and you hit the launch button and it'll move, and then it'll move, and then it'll move, and then pins are down, and it's like, well, I kind of just wanted to see it go across, like a shot or something, but that's not how it works. And even when the pins go down, it's like the first row, it's like you hit the first pin, and then the back, and then the third, and it's like, okay, I get it, but yeah, it just doesn't look good. The fact that it's black and white just hurts it so much, and the fact that there's no circles, that the frame rate's like terrible. Yeah, it's not exactly frame rate, but you know what I'm saying.
Right, sort of like the refresh rate, basically, but...
Yeah, the refresh rate is just terrible, so that hurts it. That hurts the graphics a lot, and the fact that the score isn't on the screen the whole time, that hurts it. I was even hoping when I got a spare or something that it would be like, big letters like spare, or something like exciting. Instead, it's just like 15 points. Then it moves on, I feel like there's a lot of missed opportunity there. There's a lot of things that I think are actually maybe indicative of the console not being good, which I'm worried about.
Right.
Like the refresh rate and the black and white, having that in there. But yeah, so that's probably not great. For graphics, I just left it as a 1. I couldn't go higher. For sound, we have, I guess, like a unique sound to it, but it's just like a ping, kind of like the ping pong or the pong noise, but it's not that. It is something unique, I think, but it's just a single noise that even when you get like at the end of the game, I think it just goes like dun 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 dun.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's it. So it's not good. I just gave it a 1 out of 10, even though it is unique. It's just like there's nothing bowling about it. So, it didn't feel like bowling sounds. And then for relevance, this is where, I think we've done this before, but I wanted to include the RCA Studio II in there in general for my relevance for this first game. So overall, for both bowling and the RCA Studio console as a whole, I gave it a 7.5 out of 10. Maybe that might seem high considering that the game is not that good, and I think you guys are kind of picking up that this whole console is probably not going to be that good. But the reason why I wanted to give it high is not only is it the second generation console, and that in and of itself at this time in history is a big deal, but I do think there are some interesting things about the console. Having the number pads as a controller, it makes me think of, well, when people actually make games for keyboards, they might look to the RCA Studio II and see how did they do arrow keys and stuff using the number pad. Because, even in titles today, we use number pads sometimes as the controller. So to have the first ever console, and it might be the first ever time a number pad has been used as a controller in gaming history at all, I was like, maybe that's a big deal. So I don't know if that directly inspired anything, but it's one of the more interesting things about the console, and I think does have the potential for making unique games and stuff with that controller, because it is so weird. But considering that it's kind of like a portion of the keyboard that we use today, that might really influence some people when it comes to computer games later, especially since the RCA guys make computers as well. So I just thought that was very interesting. So overall, I couldn't make the relevance boost the score up. So I didn't do my normal of just adding and dividing. I just went for a 2 out of 10 because I think that's what bowling should get. I think it's actually a genuinely fun game, but the graphics are just so terrible with it.
Right.
It's not a looker, And, if you can get around that, I think you'll have a good time playing it, but you're not going to want to play more than one game, I think. I was kind of done with it at that point, even though I didn't need to play a full game to rate it, and I did, which is a good sign. But
right,
yeah, I don't know. It's like a little, little hard to look at.
Yeah, I think lackluster is a good overall descriptor for these.
Yeah, but interesting though. Interesting.
Yes,
and it's absolutely interesting. Also, I want to mention this. It's very clear reading about this console that it was meant to come out like last year.
Right. Like possibly even before the Fairchild, or at least around the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, I actually read that Joyce in an interview said it was supposed to come out before the Fairchild. And to me, that makes total sense. And the games, now that it's come out after the Fairchild, they feel like a lot worse than I think they would have been, just 6 months ago. So, I don't want to beat up on it too much because I think it's just kind of like almost a product of poor management on RCA's part. And it's not really the fault of the games or the console itself. So, yeah, it's a very interesting one in history, but kind of sad that it came out when it did, and it had the potential of being a lot earlier. So it's an interesting one. But Wes, why don't you take us into the last game of the launch titles here?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one that I got to play and take a look at in depth. It's called Freeway. And there's some differences here, but there's going to be a lot of echoing of what Ben said basically. We do, of course, want to appreciate that this is a substantial console, and if it came out earlier, it might be more impactful. And I do love that there are no Pong games on it at release. There's like a racing game, a bowling game, and then some weird drawing games. But that being said, Freeway isn't, like the hottest game you'll ever play. So getting into it, it's a racing game that's top down, kind of similar to Speed Race. It's a straight track. You're looking top down on the cars. And basically, you just avoid the cars that come up on the screen, except it looks like all the cars move in the same pattern, and they might all actually be the same car because you only ever see one other car on the screen at the same time. Unless it's sort of like scrolling graphics. So you'll see the bottom half of the car in front of you and the top half of the car below you. But
I see. They match up though?
Yes, as far as I could tell, they match up. So I think it's just like one car that you're continually passing. And I don't want to harp on it too much because this will come with my gameplay, but it's always moving in the same pattern.
Yeah.
So you try to get as far as you can in 2 minutes, then you get a score at the end of it, and it does a couple beeps, shows you a score, and that's all well and good. Hitting cars slows you down. You don't stop, but you go down to the base speed, and you it doesn't push you out of the car when you hit it. You could pass all the way through the other car, although the opposing car keeps moving on its horizontal side-to-side pattern as you're moving forwards through it, which is a little weird, but it basically just slows you down a lot whenever you hit one.
Kind of like hitting grass or something.
Right, yeah, like in some of or like whatever's off the track in some of the old school racing games. Well, even current racing games. And nothing happens when you hit the borders, but there are borders here. You can kind of ride along against them and you don't lose speed or anything. And basically you can shift up and down, and then you start off slow, but the more regardless of what gear you're in, you have to get up to speed to get to the full speed for that gear, which you just kind of have to go in the same direction without hitting something for a little bit. So that's the basic gameplay of it. And getting straight into my ratings, the graphics, I gave a 1 out of 10, same as Ben. They just feel a little lacking for 77. There's only 2 cars on the screen at the same time. They're black and white, of course. There are sort of like scrolling graphics, but it gives this weird effect where it looks like the car in front of you and behind you are sort of only moving side to side while you're moving forward.
Yeah.
Because it also doesn't really give you a good feel of like speed. There's not much indicator of what's going on other than I think there might be maybe like pips on the guardrails so that you know you're moving, or at least like whether you're going fast or not, you can tell that you're moving. But the cars themselves sort of just look like Grand Track cars, except a little larger. It's like a rectangle with sort of spokes and then a rectangular wheel coming out, 4 wheels coming out. So you know it's a car, but it doesn't look great. And the player car only looks very slightly different. It has like 1 pip on the top of the car, and it's a slightly wider car. But graphically, 1 out of 10. Not too great. For sound, I actually gave this one the same rating as Ben as well. I gave it a 1 out of 10. I appreciate that it's different than traditional Pong sounds, but it is just one beep that is like different pitch played in succession, or it's a different length. So it's just like one beep sound that they're using. And it only plays in Freeway when your car is getting up to speed, when you hit another car, or when the game ends. So it's this really strange thing where like if you're playing the game really well, you don't hear any noise.
Weird.
And I do want to say that like the getting up to speed sound is pretty cool. Like they timed the beep, so it's kind of like da, 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 and like it sounds like you get up to speed, but then there's no drone once you're at top speed. It just stops.
Yeah.
And if you don't hit any other cars, there's just nothing. So I thought just like that totally brings you out of it. Any like illusion of speed that this had from the quick beeps when you're getting up to speed is just totally gone, because now it's just like silence on this screen that doesn't even look like you're moving very fast. So that was one of the big detractors in the sound for me. It's just a very strange thing for a racing game. I mean, with the one sound that they did have, it probably would have been overpowering if it was just constantly playing, but it might have been better than silence. I don't know. And the gameplay here is where I deviate a little bit from what Ben said on his. Bowling sounds like it was a decent time. Freeway, I gave a 0.5 out of 10.
Oh no.
I'm cool with racing games. They might not be my favorite type of game, but the fact that there is only one opposing car that just loops on the screen, that is always moving in the same side-to-side pattern with no like semi-random vertical movement or anything, and that basically, I mean, I wasn't super good at the game, so I don't want to act like I'm bragging based on this review, but if you got up to speed and you could read the side-to-side pattern well, you could just do it flawless, I feel like, really easily. So that was a little bit weird. There's also a strange slowdown of like everything on the screen when your car moves sideways or diagonally to dodge other cars.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of seemed like the refresh rate of the car moving sideways. I'm going to get into technical explanations that I don't actually understand, but for whatever reason, when it was trying to like move your car and say like, okay, display it on this side of the screen because it's moving sideways, the other cars moved side to side slower as well because like they couldn't keep up or something. It was very strange. But that combined with the weird slow refresh rate that Ben and I were talking about just made it feel not fast, not good.
Yeah.
And even when you're going in a straight line, you like don't see much movement. And then even if you don't mind that so much, I feel like if you're going fast and constantly doing something different, a 2-minute time limit might not be that bad. But for this, since it's just the same thing the whole time, 2 minutes was like killer. I got through one and I was like, okay, I don't really feel like I need to beat my high score. I'll leave it at that. Yeah, so it's maybe a little harsh, but I was not a fan of the gameplay on this one. And I'm glad that you rated the RCA Studio II in the relevance for yours, because I did not include it in mine. So I gave Freeway a 3 out of 10 for relevance. I do think the RCA Studio II is important as the second cartridge system. It's a Gen 2 system, but Freeway itself feels like it doesn't really make any new innovations on the racing game genre. Like it kind of just feels like bad speed race, pretty much.
Yep.
And I mean, granted, this is a racing game on a console, so of course there's different capabilities there. And it's nice to see some non-Pong clones. So maybe it does have a little bit of relevance for the fact that it's a top-down racing game on a console, but I don't think it's really anything huge. I don't know if people are really looking at this as like an inspiration for other racing games on consoles in video game history.
Yeah, I kind of doubt it.
So overall, I gave it a 1 out of 10. I do think it's cool to see this top-down type racing game on a console, but Freeway doesn't really deliver in any of the departments. It's all right, but doesn't really stand out, and especially when you start comparing it to Fairchild Channel F games, it just, that black and white really kills it. So with that and the lack of engaging sound, it's just like I'd kind of rather be playing a Mattel Auto Race, which is a little cruel, but at least that had more cars. I mean, it had much less to render because it's just red lines, but it felt like you were actually dodging stuff, you know?
Right. It didn't have a weird slowdown effect for no weird whatever you try to turn.
Yeah. So that is Freeway. It's an interesting one, but maybe not executed so great.
Yeah, I feel like it's another one of those that it just suffers because of the time it came out. Because, you know, like I was looking back and in September of or like October of last year in 76, we talked about the Indy 500 by URL. Like, I know for a fact that that one influenced way more than this racing game did. And that one had a 2-player version of race, and it was in color. And it's like, okay, well, this is really looking bad now for the RCA version.
Yeah, if it's a like console racing game in mid 76, you might be like, oh wow, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So
yeah, because we wouldn't have seen it before, really. And it's interesting too, because even though it came out late, it feels like the games weren't like revised or updated or anything. It was like, this is a game that we had finished a year ago, and we're just going to throw it out now.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so it feels really weird. But, you know, the RCA Studio 2 as a whole, I don't hate it. Compared to Pong consoles that just play Pong, it's actually genuinely interesting to look at these games. They're not good games right now, and I'm not sure what the future holds for the console and for its games as far as how good they are, but it is a breath of fresh air in some weird way.
Yeah, definitely.
That's hard to describe, but as far as like, you know, how cool it is and how relevant it is, you know, it had the first ever female working on it. That's really important to the history of video games. And it had a couple other interesting innovations, but the games, I don't know.
I think that sums it up pretty well.
Yeah. I'll be looking forward. I think next episode, Wes, we're going to go back to some Fairchild games, and I'm looking forward to that.
Oh yeah, some more of that Fairchild weirdness.
Yes. So maybe at that time we can talk and see how those compare to these RCA games. If it's really is much better than we thought. But let's keep it going for now. We've got a couple honorable mentions here. This first one came out in January of 77 still. It's called Twin Course TT by Sega, which is a 2-player version of Man TT, otherwise known as the Fonz.
Oh, yeah.
That I looked at a while ago. But there's not much more info on this. This whole line of games, we've had like basically no videos or emulation for, and I believe this is the same case. We do have pictures of another like extra wide cabinet with 2 steering wheels and seats and stuff, which is cool, but sucks we can't play it.
Yeah. And next up, we have Wall Break by Taito, which also came out in January 77. Not really too much info on this one at all, but based on the name Wall Break, it sounds like it was probably some sort of Breakout clone.
The next ones are kind of interesting and weird ones. I wasn't sure if I wanted to even mention them, but I think I will. They're called Think 2, Think 14, and Think 15. And I don't know if you remember way back in the day when we did Petit 5, but Petit 5 was called Petit 5 because it was on like the 5th like drive of this of the
Play-Doh
mainframe
system
computer, right?
they were using, yeah.
So this is the same kind of deal. So they had a computer they probably named it Think or whatever. And this is game number 2 that was in the 2 slot, the 14 slot, and the 15 slot. And these were all CRPGs, very much like Petit 5, but they were all deleted by school administrators when they found them at Urbana High School, which is where they were made. Which means they're lost. They're gone. Nobody knows what they were. There's no pictures of them, but the reason why I'm talking about them is the same people that made those games will go on to make a very special CRPG next year. So I wanted to kind of throw that in there. This was the beginning of something that's going to be really cool when we get there next year. So watch out for that.
And I have a guess that it's going to be developed at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, because that's where we see they had that Play-Doh system where everyone was making these games.
Yeah. We'll see. It'll be 78 next year. So hopefully more people have connected. But I have no clue, to be honest. I haven't looked at it too much. Moving on from that, we have a couple magazines here. There's a lot more magazines that had games this year compared to previous years. And I didn't want like every episode to go through every single magazine. I mean, we already do that for creative computing and personal computing or the People's Computer Company. And I didn't want to like keep adding to that list.
Yeah. You can only hear us talk about so many bagel interpretations.
Yeah. So I kind of wanted to just cover all 12 issues in one honorable mention here. This first one is called the Kilobod magazine. I think the first magazine came out in January 77. I don't think there was any 76. I could be wrong. But I looked through all 12 issues and they only had, the games that we know and have talked about 1,000 times, like Lunar Lander and Bagels. The more interesting ones include one called Hang Math, which is like Hang Man, except it's math problems. And it was funny. They were like very specific. They're like, this game's non-violent, which is why it's way better than Hangman, which is interesting. But they had Hang Math. They had one called Kino, which is kind of like this random guessing game that I thought was a little interesting, but not worth playing or was unable to be played or something. But yeah, we're just going to cover all those issues together, and those were really the highlights, and they're not like highlights. So I was like, yeah, let's just do this all right now.
Right. And in the same vein as that, we have some Byte Magazine games. Byte Magazine also came out last year, but there weren't really interesting games in that or this. For this, there was mostly stuff kind of like NIM and Star Trek variants. It did have one stock market sort of game, but that was mainly just a simulation.
Yeah.
And now we're getting into the second game that I got to take an in-depth look at, which I actually did get to play, which was exciting because we didn't know if we were going to be able to get it up and running.
Yeah. Before you start, Wes, can I just say this has been one of the hardest to research games I've ever had to do because it's called Trek 80. I don't know if you guys remember, but we've already covered at least 2 Trek 80s in this timeline, I think. Both were called Trek 80 by different people, and there's like 2 versions of this game, and the dates were different and the companies were different, but the gameplay looked the same. I was like, oh my god. I don't mean to like start on a bad note, but this has been one of the worst games to research. But I think we figured it out. I think we know what's going on now, but it took a couple hours, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, and I came fresh at it from not having to do the research of this, so I might have a little bit of a rosier interpretation. But basically, it seems like part of the reason these are so hard to research is everyone wanted to make a Star Trek game, and everyone wanted to do it with code specifically for different computer releases. Yeah. So this one was created by Steve Dampier for the Sol 20, and there was also a version of it called Invasion Force that was released. That was basically the same game, except that was for the TRS-80. Steve Dampier made them, but then they were published and released by Processor Technology. So basically, this Trek 80 game combined the features from the earlier Star Trek and Trek 73 games. The Enterprise is tasked by Starfleet Command with clearing a sector of Klingons and basically just got to destroy them all. They didn't have to use any fake names like some of the other Trek games that we played, although Invasion Force might have used some non-licensed naming. But getting into the gameplay of this, like the previous games, it has lots of complicated gameplay options, which is, as I've said before, both a strength and a weakness. The map itself is made out of 100 quadrants, which each have 100 sectors within them. So it's
a little intense.
It's gigantic, yeah. A sector is basically like your ship occupies one sector. So you have a warp drive that you can warp to different quadrants with, and then you also have an impulse drive, which you can move throughout a quadrant between sectors with. And each sector can be occupied by 2 different types of Klingon ships, mines, stars, bases, and the Enterprise. And basically you just shoot torpedoes and phasers around you in 8 different directions on the grid around you. And you can use a long-range scanner to check multiple quadrants around you, see where the Klingons are at, and you could also use a short-range scanner to search within your own quadrant, or maybe that's just adjacent quadrants. I forget. It was confusing, basically. But they did give you something, so it wasn't just like, let me go through 1,000 or 10,000, whatever 100 squared is, spaces to see if I can find Klingons. Like, you could just scan them and then find them, thankfully. Which is good, because if you have a way to find them, then all that space is more of a asset than an issue. It's not like I have to get through all this space. It's like, oh, look at all these options I have. So I did like that about it. And the whole game happens in real time, which is really cool. There's no like weird refresh rate like some of the other Trek games that we've played, or the manual refresh like, right. I forget which Trek that was, but that was annoying for that one.
I think Empire.
Yes, that was Empire, or Empire 4. It was a later release of Empire, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, where you had to manually refresh it. And I think that was on the Play-Doh? No, Play-Doh automatically. Yeah. I forget.
Yeah, that was on Play-Doh.
But let me get right into my ratings for this. For graphics, I gave it a 2 out of 10. Like Targ for the Sol 20. Graphics were basically just ASCII characters, but there's really enough differentiation with the amount of characters that you could use that you can easily figure out, like, oh, this is a Klingon warbird, this is a Klingon cruiser, and like these are mines, these are stars. And once you look at the legend that they have on the screen at all times for you to differentiate things with, it's really easy to just recognize what's around you. So graphically, I thought that was really good, and you can see the ships moving in real time. It's not just your ship that moves. The Klingons will also kind of move towards you or run away and stuff like that. But that being said, it is still black and white, and there's not really any extra flair. There's a lot of good ship information on the screen and a lot of legends, but it's like so much when you first open the game up. There's just like this grid, numbers on the grid so that you can type in your commands, a list of all the possible movement commands you can do, and it's a lot. It's helpful information, but it's maybe not visually presented in the best way because it just kind of assaults you when you first go into the game. For sound, I actually gave it a 1 out of 10. There were apparently, I think it was Targ as well for the Sol 20. This had the option where you could link up an AM radio to get it to play sounds when you tuned it to a certain frequency. But but I couldn't find a sample of it, so I just gave it a 1 out of 10 because if it was anything like the previous AM radio sounds that we heard for the Sol 20, which I'm assuming it was probably just kind of like spacey, weird radio static kind of noise. So I think at the time it would have been pretty cool. It might have sounded like whatever imaginary space sounds, even though there's no sound in space you might be getting while flying the Enterprise. But it probably wasn't great sound. For the gameplay for this, I gave it a 2 out of 10, but it was really tough to rate this because, as I've said with sort of the double-edged sword of these Star Trek games, it's so cool that you have so many options of what you can do. But there's so many options that it's overwhelming. I just end up doing phasers every single time, even though I know torpedoes might be better for the situation because my brain's like having trouble reading the text and being like, what command do I type? And I can only remember like the 3 movement commands and 2 firing commands that I need to be able to operate, and not having the other. With more time spent on it, you might be able to get those options in your brain. But
right. And because it's in real time, if you don't press anything, I imagine you just keep getting hit and stuff. Is that right?
Yeah. And I should mention too, I forgot to mention it, but when you shoot, it actually like does the sort of like text game method of highlighting where like it turns the background white and then all the characters black so that it looks like this beam's going across the screen.
Oh, cool.
So that was really cool. It does that in a wave and you can actually see your phaser travel in real time. But there's not too much indication, at least in the couple battles I had, of when I was getting hit. There's just like in the top right, the status thing, which goes from like danger to like red alert to like engines overloaded and stuff like that. So unless I was missing something or it was just getting lost on the screen, there wasn't like the same kind of visual indicator of you getting hit as when you fire. But yeah, if you're not moving around, you would keep getting hit as far as I could tell. So having all those things memorized is pretty crucial to you being able to actually win the fights in the game. But if I got more comfortable with controls, I think it would be pretty fun. But just for kind of sitting down playing it for a while, I think 2 out of 10 for gameplay is pretty fair. It's interesting, but still pretty similar to the complex Star Trek gameplay that we've seen before. For relevance, I gave it a 4 out of 10. We've seen a lot of Star Trek games, and we're definitely going to see a lot more. So each one that's developed for a new platform, I think, is important because, it's spreading it to a wider audience and say like, hey, I only code on the Sol 20, so now Star Trek's on the Sol 20 and I'm introduced to that. It's still spreading it to more people and getting more people interested in creating video games. But this version itself, other than the really cool ASCII graphics that it had, didn't really do too much for the gameplay that makes it super new and innovative. I really appreciate that it's real time and I like the graphical representations they have, but it's still kind of just another computer Star Trek game.
Right. I think, is there some sort of word we can use for like this game in Targ? Like they have it's ASCII characters and it is, but it's just a different level from what we've seen. Like as far as the ASCII characters moving, it's almost like there's animation with the ASCII characters in a weird way.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard
to describe how much better this looks compared to the other Star Trek games that we've covered. But it does look way better. Yeah, even though it still is ASCII.
And I think I talked about it when I was rating Targ as well. Like my brain knows that it's all just like number signs and ampersands and all that, but Targ looked like really good. The way that he
Yeah.
shot ships and all that, it was awesome. But yeah, it's just the way that I think it's people, and maybe it was the capabilities of the Sol 20 as well, but people getting creative with how fast you can switch the display of characters on the screen to make it look like it's animation almost. Or,
Mhm.
I mean, maybe if you get into a strict definition that qualifies as animation. I'm not sure. But yeah, I call it ASCII graphics, but it isn't static. Like it's moving, it's visually interesting, even though it's just all these characters on the screen.
Yeah. And even like being idle, I think there's still like movement going on, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like other ships could move. This
Mhm.
one, I don't know if it had anything. I think text would show up on the screen, like Spock would be talking to you sometimes.
Hmm.
And there was I forgot to mention it, but there's a intro screen where it sort of like shows this dude's face made out of ASCII characters, and it's supposed to look like he's talking to you and giving you your orders for
That sounds amazing.
Starfleet. Yeah, it's weird because the only moving thing on that is I think his mouth like opens and closes, like it
Uh-huh.
turns from like a O to a dash repeating, but then also one of his eyes is always winking. I don't know if that was just like
He's
a
giving you the
fun.
look.
Yeah, yeah. He's like, hey, kill all those Klingons if you know what I mean. And I'm like, I don't know what you mean. You just tell me to kill all the Klingons? But so that was interesting, but it at least is cool. It's like sort of a landing screen and you're not just straight into the game. There's this cool like title like we've seen with some of the Play-Doh games that we've done before.
Yeah, it is cool.
So overall, I gave it a 2.5 out of 10. I think it's a really cool addition to computer Star Trek games, and it does some cool stuff with ASCII characters and the sort of animation using those characters, as Ben and I were just talking about, and gives it this gigantic map, which, like I said, if you figure out how to use the long range and short range scanners well, I think it's more of a feature than it is like a hindrance, because easily that gigantic map could just make the game feel like a pain.
Right.
But taking that all into account, still a super complex Trek game with a similar scenario to other Trek games that we've seen and pretty similar gameplay. So I think it's definitely taking a look at and even spending some time with and playing through it. But you're going to have to spend a lot of time with it if you want to really get the most enjoyment out of it, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, the graphics I think are the standout for it.
Yeah.
And I remember I found this game maybe even in my 75 research, so way long ago. And at the time, I was like, this looks so good compared to what we were looking at the time. I think since Targ has come out, it's lost some of that.
Right.
Because Targ just like bumped the whole game up so much. But yeah, it's still it's very unique and interesting. And by the way, this is by Steve Dompier, right?
Right.
When you said that, I was like, that Steve Dompier, have we covered something else he's done? Do you know what else he's done with us?
I know I've heard his name a lot, but I forget specifically.
I only have him in one other place.
Oh, okay.
He did Dazzlemation, the Martini animation drawing.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
He did that. So maybe this guy's just really into animation and that's what he does. But I thought it was so funny. It was the same guy. I was like, this guy made the Martini thing.
Yeah, man of many talents.
Yep. So yeah, I hope you guys like that. Trek 80, also known as Invasion Force, which was the re-release that came out later. But yeah, hopefully that's the last Trek 80 I'll have to cover because there's been a couple. But I think that's by far the coolest one of all of them. So
yeah, it's got a lot of cool stuff going on, and it's one of those ones where I think you do it a little bit of a disservice by not being able to play it for a ton. Like I might have given it higher reviews if I sat down and played it for 8 hours, but also I would have had to sit down and play it for 8 hours, which is tough for a game like that. So
yeah, no, I understand. But I think if you're a casual person and you see like a screenshot of Super Star Trek, which I think came out in '74, and then you see this, it's like this looks way better.
yes,
But
yeah.
Compared to arcade machines and consoles and stuff, it's just not as interesting maybe as some of those other things. But
Right.
you know, one day. Let's close out here today. I've got two more honorable mentions I want to go through quick. These are both other console groups that I didn't talk about last episode because we talked about so many console groups. This first one is there's just only one console in this group, and that's the Video 2800 by Interton. This had a F4301 chip, and we actually already covered this chip. It was the Actually, the racing game that I mentioned earlier in this episode, it was URL's Indy 500, which basically featured two racing games and tennis and hockey. And it was actually genuinely a pretty cool console. The racing games were cool. There was, like I mentioned, there was 2-player. I think there was even a 1-player versus AI, which was cool for the racing. But this Interton console, the Video 2800, used that same chip and had the same games. It was in color even on the way back in the URL last year, but so this one's also in color. But that's the only console that uses this chip this year in 77. And then we have one more group here, consoles that use the 8550 chip. And I know what you're thinking, Wes. This is more 8500 stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. But so basically, it's the 4 or 6 8500 games, but the 8550 allows for horizontal movement. So it feels more like a Magnavox Odyssey style of ping pong and stuff.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And hockey. So I don't know. I think it could be interesting, but really it's not going to change our scores at all. So I was like, we're not going to rate this.
Worth mentioning, maybe not worth playing.
Yeah. As far as I know, I only have 2 here listed that were for sure had this 8550 chip. One was called the Telespiel Las Vegas model, the ES2208 by Philips, and the Various Play by TAE, otherwise known as Técnicas Avanzadas Electrónicas, I'll say. Some Spanish
That was pretty close, I think, yeah.
All right, cool. And that'll do it for us today. So I hope you guys like that. The RCA Studio II, a brand new second-gen console. And honestly, if we start replacing our first-gen consoles with these second-gen, I'm not going to complain.
We're happy men, yeah.
Yeah, we'll be happy. If we can stop playing Pong games, that'd be great. And for this to release with no Pong games, it's a bold move, and I respect it. So yeah, I hope you guys like that. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing about Joyce, the first woman to make a game and be paid for it, which is great. And we also cover some computer games, some consoles. Wes covered Trek 80, the Steve Dompier version. So if you're going to check that out, I highly recommend you guys. There's a very short video on YouTube, but you can see the guy talking that Wes mentioned.
Yeah, it looks pretty good. Yeah.
So go check that out. I think it's called Invasion Force on YouTube. So just watch out for that. And Wes, why don't you close it out?
Yeah, so make sure to check out our website if you want to take a look back at some of the other timeline stuff that we've covered previously. Check us out on Twitter and also send us an email if you have any questions. And thank you so much for listening as always.
Yep. Just a reminder, next week we're returning back to the Fairchild. That's very exciting. We're also going to be covering the Commodore PET. So be ready for that, and we'll catch you next week. Have a good one.
See you guys next week.